Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Chrissy Jambowski, and I'm the Prevention Program Coordinator for CTC, or Communities That Care of Greater Downingtown. We are so excited to have you with us here tonight for this amazing program. But before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple of tech things as we how we kind of run the show with this. So this is a webinar format. So that means we cannot see you, but we very much want to interact with you during this program. So you will see at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat and a Q&A button. So please feel free as we're going through and as Tina is presenting to use these functions to ask questions, make comments. We will be asking questions as we're going through the program and also have time for question and answer at the end. So make sure that you're paying attention to those. We will also be using the chat to share information and links to different resources, other programs that we have coming up later this year and other things that are relevant. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to pass it to our Executive Director, Dr. Sinelli.
Hey, thanks, Christy. Hello, everyone. I'm Beth Ann Sinelli, Executive Director of Communities That Care of Greater Downingtown. Very excited to welcome you back to our first parent speaker program for this school year. And as many of you may or may not know, CTC partners with the Downingtown Area School District each year to provide programming for parents. And we will have 3 programs this year, and this is our first in the series. We will also offer a parent speaker series program in the winter and then also in the spring. And CTC works with a number of prevention providers and partners that serve the Downingtown community. So we are really happy tonight to have Tina joining us as one of our prevention partners from Care and Treatment Center. And so I'm going to ask Sarah Brooks to please do the introduction for Tina. And thanks so much again for joining us this evening.
Yeah. Thanks, Beth Ann. I'm Sarah Brooks. I work with Student Assistance Services in the Downingtown Area School District. Specifically, I oversee our SAP programs. I work very closely with our prevention specialists, and I also work with Dr. Sinelli on our wellness. So I'm very excited for this evening's presentation. I think I've known Tina, I'm going to age myself, probably somewhere between 15 and 20 years now. I've heard aspects of this presentation at various times, and I've always thought to myself, we need to bring this into the district. So I'm very excited for the opportunity. And Tina, I just want to thank you in advance for sharing all of your knowledge with our community.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate the opportunity. And I'm going to age myself I'll be aging myself when you see my tech skills, which takes a little bit of time, but also aging myself as well when it comes to how long I've been in the behavioral health world, which is kind of interesting. I just calculated it for the first time the other day, and I'm in my 30th year of working in the behavioral health world in a variety of different capacities. I've been at Care and Treatment Centers in our Education Alliance for 18 years, doing program development and a lot of overseeing different services in schools, behavioral health services. So, and then I also, and about, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, I started our peak performance program, substance use prevention and wellness for athletes. So really focusing on wellness now for athletes. And so that's my career experience doing all of this. And you'll find out why throughout this presentation I started doing programming specifically for athletes. It'll become very obvious to you as you learn some of the information that I'm going to share with you tonight. But I'm also a former athlete myself, high school and college, but I'm now also a parent. Well, not now, I have been for 22 years now, a parent of athletes as well. So my oldest daughter is a senior in college this year. She plays, she was a 3-sport athlete in high school and played soccer all year round for travel soccer, and now plays Division I soccer in New York. So we've got, it's a sad time for me. We've got about 6 more games unless they make the playoffs of her career, and she's hanging up her cleats. So kind of a difficult time, but more difficult for my husband, I assure you, than for me. But definitely it's been quite a journey for that. And then my youngest daughter is a 4-time All-American, top All-American, all-star cheerleader. It's probably the scariest sport of all the sports my kids have played. They toss her in the air about 20 feet, and she does these incredible tumbling passes that just scare the life out of me. But she loves it, and he plans to. Her goal is to cheer at Penn State. We'll see. Well, if she'll be able to do that someday. But my point in telling you this is it consumes me, right? Obviously. And I'm like you, spent so much time sitting in cars, driving my kids to practice, and just the time and the financial commitment that we make to our children's sports. It's incredible, and I understand and speak your language. And so bringing these two passions together, when I looked at some of the information around athletes, or how many athletes that I was asked to work with over the years in the behavioral health world, and I thought we need to be tailoring some services specific to athletes, and we'll talk about why that is. And as I'm going through some of this information, I really want you to think about your child and the sports that they play, and then how this information is relevant to your child specifically. Is their sport a strength-based sport? Are they an endurance sport? Kind of looking at how different substances impact different types of athletic capacities. What is that doing for your child, or what could that do to your child? So, but before we get into that, I want to share some information that I know you're going to find pretty fascinating. So right now in the United States, there are over 8 million high school athletes, over 8 million. And this statistic has grown every year for the last 25 years. And at some point in a district, looking at this in a national way, on average, about 57% of high school students play a school-sponsored sport at some point in their high school career. So, that's a large percentage of kids that are playing sports in your community, in your district. Having said that, there are 520,000 NCAA athletes in all division 1, division 2, division 3, 520,000. So that means only 6% of kids that play a high school sport are going to get the opportunity to play that sport in college. And that, when I do programming with high school teams, I always ask, who wants to play their sport in college? And I can tell you, it is more than 6% of hands that go up. The majority of kids want to play their sport in college. And yet we know that a very small percentage of them are going to get the opportunity to do that. So what does that tell us? This is a very highly competitive for kids to play in college. And so we have kids that are looking for ways to get a competitive edge. We're seeing athletes who are needing to work through injury. I cannot sit. I cannot let somebody take my spot. I cannot miss this next game. I need these stats. I need to be recognized. And so they're pushing themselves to very high levels of performance just to be one of those 6%. And there's a lot of kids out there that do a lot to make that happen. And it also tells us something about college coaches. If any of you are going through the recruitment process with your kids, coaches can be very choosy. Now, there are exceptions, right? We have those athletes that are just so phenomenal that their behavior, their academics are not going to be the thing that's going to keep them from getting recruited. That is an exception. That is not the rule. And it certainly wasn't for my daughter. And having to be this exceptional athlete, a high-performing athlete, an exceptional student in lots of different activities with no behavioral issues. Coaches can be choosy. They want to bring on an athlete that they know is not only going to perform for them very well, but that they're going to have no problems handling the academic and the grueling schedule that they're about to be a part of. That's what they're looking for. And they can, because there's 8 million high school students for them to choose from. So that's that's something to keep into perspective. There's some things that I just feel like we got to talk about even beyond athletics, and that is just we cannot neglect the developing brain. We're going to talk about how substances are going to affect athletic performance, but it would be irresponsible for me to not talk about why, we just in general, how substances affect the developing brain. And so, we know, and this is stuff that you probably know, but a brain does not mature and fully develop till we're mid 20s into the late 20s now. I mean, more research just keeps to push that back even more. Brains develop back to front when they develop. And so that last part of the brain to develop is that frontal lobe. And so, something's going a little crazy with my, let me go back and see if I can. Did everybody see that? I told you that technology is not my friend. But here we go.
There it goes.
We're good.
I like your Homer Simpson brain. And I was like, wait a minute.
Thank you. But anyway, so the brain develops back to front. The last part of the brain to develop is the frontal lobe, right? And that is where we get our decision making, our impulse control, our logic. And so if you've ever, as a parent, seen your kid do something that just seems completely uncharacteristic, or I'm going to say this, just stupid, like what? And we say, what were you thinking, right? And they look at you and they're like, I don't know, or I wasn't thinking. That's the truth. They really weren't thinking. And it's not that they're not capable of rational thought. That's not the point. The point is that their reward center, their pleasure centers are dominant. They're looking for a good time, right? They're looking for a good time. So when you think about that and adding substances to the brain, that is absolutely going to disrupt that development, absolutely going to disrupt that development. But then we also have this, underdeveloped brain that's going to, have them take additional risks that maybe they wouldn't if they were thinking, if they were thinking logically through some of that. So I can't stress that enough, that we do not, as parents, want to disrupt this development of the brain. We want them to reach their fullest potential. But when we're talking about athletes, what makes them great athletes can make them at greater risk for substance use. And when you think about athletes and what makes athletes really great, it is, they are invincible, right? They have to believe that they're invincible to be so good at their sports, right? If they're fearful, if they're not confident, and athletes struggle with confidence at times, and we see it affects their performance. So they have to feel like I'm invincible, nobody can stop me. Nothing bad is going to happen to me. They are sensation seekers, right? Why else would they spend 90% of their time practicing a sport that they only get 10% of the time that they're actually playing? Think about kids who, put on those pads in football season in 80-degree weather and doing two-a-days. Why would they do that to themselves if they didn't love the competition? Why would they get up the day after Christmas in freezing cold weather to go to basketball practice if they didn't love their sport? They're sensation seekers. They love the thrill of it, and they are risk takers. Really that's what separates good athletes from bad athletes, that if they're willing to take risks, they most likely are going to be rewarded and have exceptional performance. So these things, invincibility, sensation seeking, risk taking, are exactly the kinds of students that also gravitate towards substance use as well. So that makes our athletes more susceptible to this. They're just the things that they identify with. In addition to that, there are additional risk factors for our athletes as well. The identity formation, their sport is their identity, right? So whatever that team culture is, that's really huge to make sure. And that's where I say, sports can be a risk, or it can be a protective factor. It really does depend on what kind of messages those athletes are receiving, and especially that team culture. Is this a team that, you know, the coach isn't addressing substance use, or a coach knows that there's substance use and they're not getting involved? You know, I've seen parents also kind of taking a lax attitude on some of that too, and, you know, thinking it's celebratory for some kids, some athletes. Like, what is that? So and that identity formation is who they are, whether they participate in that or not. I will say I do a lot of college sports teams as well. And I don't know why, but it's always lacrosse. And there's actually like some statistics about what sports use the most. And I got to tell you, lacrosse. And so when my youngest wanted to play lacrosse, I was like, no. So statistically, that is true. But yeah, I always say to the lacrosse teams, like, when you show up at the party, are people happy you're there, or are they like, oh crap, here comes the lacrosse team, right? And it doesn't matter if you're partaking in that or not. If I'm part of that team, that becomes part of my identity. And from a high school setting, you know, our athletes are going to school with their school logo on and with their sport displayed. So it becomes their identity. So if this is a team where there's, you know, 3 or 4 kids that are using heavily, they kind of make that assumption that they all are. So that guilty by association, it becomes our identity. Social isolation, these kids are always together, right? So whatever you see, that, you know, that mob mentality, that if this is something that is defining our team, if we are known to go out on a Friday night and party together, that that becomes your social network, and that's going to leave your child at risk as well. And so that social isolation, they kind of are together as a pack. Athletic injury, you guys know, as parents of athletes, when your child has been injured, what does that look like? It is like caging a wild tiger, right? They are grumpy, they are depressed. Basically, they're getting their endorphin rush through their sport. Their sport is like their drug. And when that's taken away, we see signs of withdrawal, very similar signs to substance use as well. Depression sets in, irritability, all of those things are very difficult. It's a very lonely time for those athletes as well, because it's their identity, right? And then coping with performance stress as well. So, you know, we have a lot of kids, again, when only 6% are making it to college, we see kids who are looking for a competitive edge. I can tell you many stories of athletes who, you know, are injured and yet they refuse to sit out. So they're finding who just had their wisdom teeth out, who just had, you know, knee surgery, and they have a prescription for an opiate. And if I can just take that and get me through the next game. So their intention isn't to use to get high. Their intention is to use to perform better or to perform through injuries. So very, very risky times for our kids. So looking at team culture, looking at what's going on for your athlete, and making sure, you know, we're preparing them for those situations is really, really important. When we look at use in general, you know, why athletes might use, of course, there's the same reasons that any student might choose to use substances. Is there a genetic predisposition? What are the family messages that we're sending to them? You know, I oftentimes ask parents, how many of you had a conversation with your kids about substance use? And all the parents' hands go up in the audience. Well, of course they would. No one wants to say they didn't. But, you know, all the hands go up. And then I'll meet with their kids later, and I'm like, how many of your parents have talked to you about substance use? And maybe 1 or 2 hands. So even if you think you've had that conversation, we got to make sure you're having the right conversation, because there seems to be a disconnect sometimes. So what messages are we sending? And it's not just sending it once, it's sending it over and over and over again with them. So it's not just a one sit down, it's every time we get an opportunity. Peer pressure is very real. Even though parents are the #1 influence on whether or not their kids choose to use substances, peers are still a factor in that, right? And especially for our athletes, lack of education, the amount of misinformation that kids have around substance use is incredible, right? And we're seeing in the vaping culture right now, where it's just a lack of information that they have, or just wrong information that's being put out there, and they're making decisions based on that. Any mental health issues, right? We see a lot of kids who self-medicate, anxiety, depression, all kinds of behavioral health issues that they're struggling with, and they prefer to use substances over some other types of ways to deal with that. So in addition to the regular stuff that our athletes are dealing with, our athletes are sometimes looking to use substances because they think it's going to give them a competitive edge. Coping with injury. We see especially a lot of female athletes trying to lose weight, especially going from, maybe not performing much over the summer and then having to come back and deal with fitness tests and things like that. Big time of concern during those times. And then higher feelings of invincibility, whether that's perceived or societally supported, so a lot of kids think, I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm an athlete. No one's going to call me out on it. There's that perception of that. And then sometimes that's true. I can't tell you how many times I have seen that happen, where, we're seeing some red flags for some athletes, and we think, let's just get them to the next level, or, the sport is the answer. And the reality is no, we need to always address any kind of concerns, because the longer we wait, that's most likely becoming a bigger issue. And then we're sending them off to college where they don't have the same kind of support, or a coach you're no longer part of that team. You're easily replaceable at that level. So we gotta address things that, as soon as we see them. And so I see that happen quite a bit. I actually pulled this slide in just a little bit ago because I did a national webinar just last week or 2 weeks ago on anxiety and athletics. And there was some research, and this is college research, but it is very relevant for our high school athletes as well. And I thought I'd just share it. Again, this is, I think it's a 2020 research on college athletes that, talked about stressors in their lives. And again, for all students, the stress and anxiety that they feel. But our student athletes are dealing with a whole nother level of stress. And some athletes who are coping with stress by using different substances. Injury, big games, very stressful times for them. Fitness levels, making sure that they're, at their peak performance. Playing time, starting time, if they're, in a slump, losing, they become very egocentric. I'm responsible for the loss. New team or new school, their coaches' expectations, team expectations, they put a lot of weight, again, whether that's perceived or real. Just games, tryouts, positions, getting suspended, that preseason time, their future beyond their sport, and just sport life balance, right? And that's very true in high school as well, that they struggle. They're in 6 days a week sometimes doing their sports. I mean, I'm telling you something, their schedules are grueling. There's very little time for them to kind of decompress. And so that's another reason why they'll sometimes turn to substances as this one moment where I control what is happening to me. It's rare, but how am I coping with that? How am I decompressing? And us trying to find healthier ways for them to do that. I say this, I brought this in there to show that about a third, not a third, of college athletes test or screen for moderate to severe levels of anxiety as a result of all of this. And again, there's also connection between that anxiety and substance use. And I just threw it in here, even though, again, it's for college athletes, really does parallel for me, high school athletes. Not a lot of research on high school athletes, not a lot. And what I have found very similar to collegiate athlete information as well. So Moving on to the different substances and how they can affect performance. So caffeine is absolutely something. It drives me nuts. And my kids, same thing. We are living in a Starbucks nation. Energy drinks, and the fact that they sometimes don't know. Even my 22-year-old had one of those Celsius energy drinks, and she knew it was an energy drink, but she had no idea how much caffeine was in it. And I'm like, do you realize what is in here? And they know how I feel about that. But also some of those supplement powders that they take, protein powders, packed with caffeine. Caffeine is going to, of course, elevate heart rate and blood pressure. That does not sound good for an athlete, right? Whose sport is going to elevate heart rate and blood pressure. It is a very dangerous combination. And I can tell you when this all started, where caffeine and athletics became one, and that was in 2015. Serena Williams was in a tournament. It's escaping me right now, but Serena Williams is in a tennis performance. She's in the last set, and she asks for an espresso, and they deliver the espresso to her during the match, and she takes a shot of the espresso and she wins. She wins. And it became this national thing. And all these products, you can literally get caffeine powder, and it is marketed right to athletes to increase performance. Now, there's a lot of different research around caffeine and how it impacts athletics, but the bottom line is how she used it was kind of accurate. I mean, what caffeine does for athletes is it takes every bit of hydration, every bit of energy, and pushes it to the surface for them to use, and it gives them 5 extra minutes of energy, followed by extreme lethargy. So our kids who are drinking before an hour, 2-hour practice or a 3-hour match, whatever it is, they're going to fatigue quicker, and caffeine will dehydrate them. And dehydration is the worst thing, right, for our athletes. Injury, all that good stuff. We know that, right? So when we talk about caffeine and athletic performance, caffeine affects every single part of that body, of their bodies, every system of their body as well. So this is actually much more dangerous than we are giving it credit for. So, what we do say is, 4 to 6 hours before a game or a match or a performance, a competition, they shouldn't have caffeine, which is, and mostly for me, it's not just about the energy rush that they're getting rid of, it's hydration. It just depletes their muscles, and they're going to underperform, and they're going to risk injury. So we really want to make sure. And then also for athletes, something big, 4 to 6 hours before sleep as well, because it does disrupt even athletes who are great sleepers. It doesn't mean they're getting quality sleep. In fact, it probably means great sleepers are actually terrible sleepers. They're not getting to stage 3, 4 sleep where we see muscle repair and things like that. Caffeine will never let them get there. So we want to really watch their caffeine use. And I, as a parent, say that I struggle with that with my own children, and am mortified. And my mother-in-law buys them the Starbucks stuff right before a game. And I'm like, what are you doing? And so I get it. I get it. It's really hard to challenge this Starbucks generation. Pre-workouts, this drives me nuts too. No one under the age of 18 should be using any kind of supplements. And I can tell you, I get called in to colleges for kids who have failed drug screens. And it's because these things are not FDA approved. We have no idea what's in them. There can be all kinds of stuff, even synthetic steroids and things like that. And that's where they're testing positive for amphetamines, steroids, things like that. In addition to it having enormous amounts of caffeine in it. So, we really want to try to get our kids to avoid this. And if they're really into it, there are kids that this is real. If it does not say NSF for sport on it, absolutely you shouldn't take it. NSF is the only organization that looks at every single supplement out in the market and they test it. And that will say whether or not if what is in the product is what they say is in the product is actually in the product. So reading those levels is really, or those labels is really important. And if it doesn't say NSF for sport, don't let your kid take it. You're really placing them at risk of what could potentially be in that. So definitely want to make sure that we're looking out for that. And, you know, I see a lot of kids doing protein powders. And the reality is that the amount of protein that they're getting in those powders, your body cannot actually absorb that much protein. So when I say that you're literally flushing your money down the toilet, you are literally flushing your money down the toilet. And how we want them to get their protein is really through other avenues, like a turkey sandwich, you know, anything that food-based, that's the most natural, organic type of protein, not the stuff that is broken down so much for them that they believe is healthier for them. But actually that turkey sandwich is much more effective and healthier for them. Going into nicotine. Again, this is a big issue right now. Nicotine is a stimulant. So we're looking at it elevating heart rate, blood pressure. It also affects the mood center of your brain. And so we see increased anxiety as a result of nicotine use. So when we talk about athletes who struggle with anxiety just as a result of their performance, and then we're adding nicotine on top of that, we can really create some very difficult situations in terms of anxiety and how that affects their performance. You know, not to mention the respiratory issues that come along with all of this, with vaping, and how it negatively impacts the immune system. I mean, it just overall, you know, I have the stuff here, but it's just really bad for them. And we should want to avoid. And I do presentations that are strictly vaping and athletics with kids, just to kind of reinforce some of that information. So we definitely don't, I mean, that what's in them is an aerosol. It is coating their lungs and really causing scarring, tissue damage, and affecting their ability to breathe in the short term and the long term. So we want to make sure our athletes really do avoid this.
Tina,
Alcohol?
can I ask you a question about vaping? Just back to the vaping really quick. Because nicotine is a stimulant, are some students looking to this thinking they're going to get that little stimulant kick? And so like maybe they won't do a pre-workout or caffeine, but they notice that they're getting that
and it's appealing
from the nicotine.
It's the buzz that they get from it. Absolutely. It is very much appealing. And again, when you think about athletes who are looking for that little rush, it's really, and then we also know like there's certain sports that are more prone to it. You know, so, you know, baseball is a big nicotine sport. I'm not just talking about the chew, but it is just, there's a connection between certain sports, and different uses, different substances. So yeah, no, it is absolutely a little buzz, a little rush of energy. They get a jolt of energy, but it's you know, long term going to really negatively affect their performance for sure. So yeah, thanks for asking.
And also, if anybody has, I'm sorry, Tina, if anybody has any questions, just, I can't do it because I made you the host, so I can't send a note to everybody, but please feel free to use the chat and the questions, just ask questions. My little PSA, so sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Ask me whatever questions, because I have a lot of information and I try to put it in a small little presentation. So certainly if I'm missing anything, I'd love to hear from you guys and definitely throw it out there. When we're talking about alcohol and athletic performance, I mean, obviously I have a list of things right here. Well, alcohol is kind of interesting and different than other substances. And, you know, we talked earlier about how the brain develops back to front. But when we drink alcohol, it affects our brains from front to back. And you kind of see that when people like an intoxication, right? So the first part is that frontal lobe, right? And how we start to, we don't think that we're actually intoxicated. So we have more, we're not believing that we're, you know, we can't drive a car, we can't do that, right? We're first convinced that we're okay. And then we start to move to slurred speech. And, you know, then we start to move to our lack of coordination. And then we move to, you know, memory and being impacted, right? Where we're blackouts or passing out, things like that. And then of course, when we see people who who pass away from alcohol poisoning, it's just slowing down all of these things from front to back until it reaches that brain stem, and it's slowing down respiration and heart until to a stop. That's how people die from alcohol poisoning. So and so when you think about that in terms of athletic performance, and I say this, that I don't see a lot of kids showing up at practice or games with alcohol in their system. But there is something that's very interesting about alcohol. Yes, we metabolize alcohol in about 5 hours time after that last drink. So 5 hours afterwards, we could still see some of these things. But there is what we call in the substance use world, post-acute withdrawal, which lasts about 48 to 72 hours. And basically alcohol is like a diuretic. It's going to very much dehydrate our muscles. It's going to hinder our ability to physically condition our output, our muscular strength, how long we can perform. And it, again, because of the dehydration, it takes us 48 to 72 hours to rehydrate after a drink. And so you're again at risk of injury and all of that stuff. And what I do for college athletes is kind of let them map out their season, because if you go into college athletes, they have the 24, 48, 72 hour rule. They can't drink 24 hours before a practice, 48 hours before a game, and 72 hours before a championship or championship games. And so what I say to athletes is, okay, let's look at your season. You have a 3-month season apparently. So let's look at, and they will tell you, oh, we can drink on a Saturday. We can drink on a Wednesday night. That they know when they're allowed to drink based on the NCAA rules, which are really for 21 and older, but they all apply it to themselves. But I say, okay, so you go out on a Wednesday night and you drink. So we're going to cross out like the next 48 hours to 72 hours that you're in post-acute withdrawal, which you're not at your best performance athletically. You're going to be slower. You're not going to be able to lift as much. You're not going to be able to perform at that level as if alcohol was never in your system. And it's simply because of the dehydration that occurs as a result of athletics. And I see kids like jamming the liquid IV and all that stuff. No. It's still, I don't care what you're doing. It's going to take you 48 to 72 hours to restore your muscles to peak performance. And when you cross that out in a season's time, it shows them that they're not at their peak performance for the majority of that season, or for a significant portion of that season. And then I kind of tie it back to their goals. Well, if you're trying to make it to the NCAA tournament, how are you going to do that if only 60% of the time you're at your best? So it's going to affect that. One of our staff, she was a D1 athlete for the University of Michigan. And she said her first 2 years at school, their captain said, no use. We're in a dry season. And they made it to the NCAA tournament both of those years. Her junior year, the captain said, do what you want, be smart, do what you want. There's a lot of drinking. They didn't make it. Next year, dry season, back to the tournament. She is convinced that decision to allow people to use alcohol significantly affected their performance. And again, for them, why are we doing all of this if we're not going to try to compete at the highest level? So I think that's really important too. And as we go on to the next thing, cannabis, which we could do a whole presentation on all of this, and I have. But going back to that, there's also this concept of a hangxiety, that hangover too, where the alcohol suppresses the central nervous system, which makes us feel calm and less anxious. But when we metabolize that, 5 hours later, we can sometimes see a jolt to the central nervous system, causing severe panic attacks and severe anxiety. We see it a lot. Especially in athletes, we see it. So I just wanted to talk about that anxiety. If you've ever heard of that term, that's exactly what's happening. Cannabis and athletic performance. This is becoming probably one of the biggest issues at the college level, where I'm getting called in and they're testing positive for cannabis. I want to say that about cannabis, as parents, it is not the same thing as we experienced. I've said I've been in behavioral health world for 30 years. That you're probably calculating how old I am. And so back in my day, cannabis was pretty benign. It was pretty benign. 1 to 2% THC, that chemical component that makes you high. Maybe even 7% might have been able to get a hold of something like that. But that's not what we see today. And to say that it's organic today, no, this is chemically engineered to have much higher levels of THC. This is being made in a lab. So this is not organic. Be very clear about that too. But this is not the same thing. It's like comparing our experience with cannabis to our kids' experience with technology. That's the best way for me to, if you're looking at your access to technology and what you had versus what your children have access to today in technology, this is similar. This is a similar comparison. It's not the same experience. I mean, we're talking 50% THC, 90% THC, depending on the form, even higher than that, right? And the variety of different ways. So that's just really important to kind of understand that again, when we're looking at the developing brain and wanting to give our kids the best opportunity to become the best versions of themselves, just avoiding substances in general. This is a pretty serious, pretty serious substance that we want to really make sure that they're avoiding. Cannabis is actually a stimulant. People think because it makes them feel calm, it makes them feel relaxed, right? Everything tastes better, everything's wonderful, everything's euphoric, right? But actually what it's doing is it's stimulating the production and absorption of things like dopamine, neuroepinephrine, serotonin, all those things that make you feel calm, make you feel great, right? So it's stimulating that, and it's tapping, and that's why it feels so awesome. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about cannabis, as different from any other substance, is how long it stays in your system, right? So it leaves our system so slowly. So we're not feeling like when we go out and we have a few drinks the next day, we don't feel so well. We know reason we don't feel so well is because of the drink the night before. We make the association. Cannabis, we don't do that, right? Because it leaves our system so slowly. And it may not be for several days, even a week later, that we're kind of feeling some of those things that we don't like to feel, right? But we're not associating that they've gotten worse because of the cannabis. What we say is, I felt better when I used the cannabis. So it's kind of tricking us, but in reality, it's making us worse because it's taking all of it and pushing it out at once, leaving you with nothing. And the more you use, your brain's going to say, I don't need to produce this because you're going to give it to me when you use cannabis. So it really kind of shuts down those things and makes things like depression and anxiety worse. And again, I say that because our athletes are really susceptible to that. So what we see in cannabis, and think about your child's sport, impaired hand-eye coordination, it's going to slow their reaction time. There's a disconnect that it can cause. And again, it stays in their system for a long time. If you're playing football, you're a running back, and you're focused on catching that ball, and that's the only thing you're focused on. Cannabis is going to just focus you on that specific thing, but you got to be looking for other things coming at you, right? So it causes hyper focus, too aware. It's going to reduce our exercise capacity. It increases fatigue. Again, we're talking about increased heart rate and blood pressure as well. And one of the things that's very dangerous is if our kids are using cannabis and they don't tell us or they don't report that. And then if they have an injury that requires surgery, it can really be very dangerous during those times when they're going under anesthesia. not good. And there is absolutely no performance enhancing potential to this drug. And so that's an important thing, I think, to talk to our athletes about as well. Over-the-counter drugs, I just want to, I can see, I want to make sure I leave any time for potential questions, but I want to just get through some of this very quickly. Just to say that, yes, our kids are going to need over-the-counter drugs. Reporting that to their athletic trainer, I think, is really important, just so they know. I always say to my kid, you're taking this, you took cold medicine, just let your trainer know. In case something happens, they know. And there can be some things that are caused by the use of some of these substances or some of these medicines. So just understanding that, again, if your kids need medication, absolutely make sure they're taking it as prescribed and that they're notifying the adults in their athletics of that. Opiates. I very much worry about athletes around opiate use. Again, not using to get high, but using to deal with pain. Opiates really reduce the perception of pain, and one of the ways they do that is by increasing dopamine. And where I see too many stories to tell, athletes who have surgery and then become addicted to the opiate, because remember what we talked about, athletics being their drugs. And when they are sidelined and when that's taken away, we're looking at severe depression or significant depression, anxiety for them, very, very tough times. And now we're giving them an opiate that not only is going to, deal with the pain, but it's also going to elevate their mood. Right. And so when we see athletes who maybe, and I'm not against opiates for that time period, but being very time limited. And what we see is after that, 2 or 3 days, they really should not need an opiate to deal with the pain. They should be able to switch to something else to cope with the pain. But they're saying, I need that. I'm in so much pain. That's the only thing that worked for me. And then we tend to increase their opiate. And I'm telling you, it's not the pain factor that they're in that's helping them. It's the increase in dopamine that's helping them feel better. So it's the emotional connection. And that's when I see athletes who then get addicted to that particular portion of the opiate. So we want to be very, very careful when our kids see a doctor or they need to want to get their wisdom teeth out or whatever, to let that doctor know my kid's an athlete and I need them to not be on for a very long time. So and making sure that they take it as prescribed and get rid of that medicine, because they will have teammates who are looking for that dopamine rush or to play through injury. So we want to get rid of that as soon as you possibly can. And it can really cause drowsiness, mental confusion, nausea, all of those things, depressed respiration, and of course that tolerance independent. So again, thinking about our athletes, mental confusion, being drowsy, depressed respiration, things we don't want to see for our athletes. So as parents, what can we do? What can you do for your athletes? Talk about it. Send very clear messages to your athletes that you do not want them to use for, first of all, we want their brains to have that chance to fully develop. But if we truly want our kids who spend all this time playing the sport to be the best athlete they can be, substances are not going to allow them to do that. So we want to look for, talk to them early and often about that. It's never too late. It's never too early. And every time we can, look for those teachable moments and talk to them about refusal skills. I think as parents, athletes have the best refusal skills to say, I'm sorry, I can't use tonight. I got practice in the morning. What a great, I got a game in a couple of days. My coach just talked to all of us about this. And if he would find out, I would be off this team. I think they have the best chance to talk about refusal skills. So talk about it with them, come up with that refusal skill so they are prepared if they are offered or they're in a situation, they're prepared with a response. Have them say it back to you. My kids are so sick of hearing that. I'm like, what are we saying tonight? I have it, Mom. I'm going to tell them I have practice in the morning. Okay, I don't care if you think it's stupid, but you're ready. So, arming with that before they head out for the evening is really important. Getting a good night's sleep. Athletes will delay sleep. Sleep is very important. It's our emotional regulator too. So it's important for repair, muscle repair, that they get there, that they have really good sleep. 5 to 6 hours of sleep is when we get into that zone. And so making sure, and athletes will delay that sleep. So, and again, it can cause difficulty with emotionally regulating, and we have trouble emotional regulating, and we have difficulty coping, and sometimes coping can lead to substance use. So making sure, I think sleep should be part of their athletic plan. Eating a healthy diet before, during, and post workout. So making sure your kids are, feel good, are in great shape, de-stress together. Doing things together, mindfulness stuff for athletes. They hate it. I always show up and we're like, we're going to do mindfulness. And they're like, get out of here, Mrs. George. And yet every time I do it with them, they love it. They're like, that was the best. I'm like, I know, stop fighting me on it, but do some mindfulness stuff, that the Calm app, or just go on YouTube and do like a 2-minute mindfulness. Again, they think it's so silly, but they always love it. I promise. Do it together. It's so great. And then if you do have any concerns, like, oh, wait, parents, your kids better than anyone. Anyone knows their kids. So them. If you see anything that is different, is concerning, if, we talked about some things tonight that you're like, wow, maybe that's my kid. Maybe I need to ask the question, talk to somebody, talk to your pediatrician. Go to your student assistance team. If you have any concerns or you're not sure where you can get resources, you think your kid might need some help, whether that's for substance use or anxiety or anything. I think we should be running support groups for athletes who are injured. I think we should be doing services directly for athletes on prevention just for them. So because, it's a large portion of that student population in your school that's playing that sport. And you've seen, and I showed you the amount of stress that these kids are under, the amount of time that they're grueling schedules. That's not how sports work for me. It's how it is today. I don't like it, but it is what it is. I'm not going to be able to change it. I'd love to, but I can't. So we got to help them learn to cope with that. And I think giving athletes services that speaks to them as athletes is really, really important. So, talk to your schools about that. Can there be some services that come in for those athletes? Can there be groups run for athletes specifically? Just talk to your school counselor, talk to your SAP folks. I do want to just include a couple of resources. I have a podcast series, Conversations That Matter, and I have an athlete one, but I got tons of stuff. And this is for not just educators, but for parents to take a deeper dive into different behavioral health issues for kids. Go in there if you're looking for some, information on, more. We talked a little bit about cannabis. I do a whole podcast on cannabis, like just great stuff in there, and just like the science of hope, how we build hope in our kids, like really good stuff. So check that out. Also, there's a parenting videos that I've done. They're little quick 3-minute videos that talk about nicotine, vaping, the little quick things that while we're waiting in the car for our kids at practice, just watch one of the videos. It's chock full of information, and it's 3 minutes of your time. So check that out as well. It's called Powerful Parenting Prevention in 3 minutes. So those are some resources. If anybody has any questions, I'm going to stop my share. I'd be glad to answer any questions, but also if you want any information, tgeorge@karen.org is my email. Feel free to reach out. I'd be glad to answer any of your questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tina. I have a question. I have a question, but this is so good. So much stuff, so much information. And but going back to one of the earlier slides that you were talking about the peer influence, like, because there's such this like identity and that social isolation piece, and then the piece of it where a kid is part of this team and that's what they live, eat, and breathe for that season, in the off season, and like these are their people, their friends, their social support, their everything, especially with these high achieving athletes and higher level and ranked sports and things.
Yeah.
What wording or kind of ways would you advise a parent to talk to their kid that says like, well, our co-captains, like they work hard, play hard, like this is what we do. And like you said, like they might feel like this is what the people that are in charge of our team are doing. So this is the expectations of me to, party hard on the weekend, whatever it is. Like,
Mhm.
even though maybe your kid cognitively is like, this is not good for me, I know my parents would be disappointed. Like, what language can parents use if they ever have the fortune of having that type of honest conversation with their kid to kind of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I mean, I do think that's where those refusal skills and again, as parents, giving them the right information, sending them what your expectations are of them is really important, but really going in there with those refusal skills in that situation. And then I'm also having a conversation with that coach. I got to be honest. I want to do some team culture. I want that coach to get involved. I want to say, hey, I'm very concerned as a parent. This is kind of the dynamics. You don't even have to talk about specific kids. You can just say like, hey, this is the team dynamic and I'm really concerned for my kid. I think that there's things that we can do. And I mean, I can tell you that that's probably one of the biggest of all the under our peak performance, all the different types of programming that we do, it is really team culture and kind of setting that positive team culture. I encourage like school districts, get all those team leaders together because that's really, I call it a peak performance leadership academy. And it looks good on a resume. I give the kids a little certificate, but like bringing those leaders together and kind of talking about like what you put out there is affecting every single kid on that team. And I also think it's important to understand for our parents that this is not the norm. Substance use is not the norm. I wish I would have said that earlier, that it truly is a smaller percentage of kids that choose to use substances. So that idea that everybody's doing it, that's a social norm. That's what kids who use tell everybody to justify their use, right? So it's really a larger percentage of kids who are not using. So kind of helping our kids identify who those kids are too is really important. But I'm going to the coach. I am going to say like, we have an issue here. I think we need to address it and talk about this team culture because I know again, working in this field as long as I do, coaches who take the time to set the standard, be very direct with those kids, their athletes, they're going to follow that lead. And sometimes it's coaches who are actively saying, this is not what's going to happen. I won't tolerate this on my team. And kids will respond to that. It's even coaches who know what's happening and don't do anything. Honestly, I don't want my kid playing for a coach like that. And also, but some coaches who just say nothing. They feel like, yeah, I don't want to say, I'm not going to say yes, no, I'm not going to condone it. I'm going to put my fingers in my ear. I didn't hear anything. I don't want to be a part of that. I'm just here to coach. We really got to encourage and empower our coaches to set good standards. And I think if they got support from parents and those of us who, I think we hear from parents who maybe want their kids to be the exception or want to, I think we need to hear from the parents who actually want them to take a stance on this, who empower our coaches to send those clear messages. So be that parent. But it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. And I mean, from the travel sport, I remember putting my daughter in one club where the kids and the parents were partying together. And I exited stage left. I was like, this is not for me. And I left and ended up in a club that sent very clear messages. And I am telling you, my daughter's team was second in the nation. And I attribute a lot of that to team culture and messages that were sent. And she's 5'1", 115 pounds, I think. And she's playing Division I soccer. She is not the ideal athlete, but I know it's because of that experience, that positive team culture that took them as far as they could. And she got looks that she wouldn't have gotten otherwise, So, I think that empowering parents to get involved and ask the other adults around them to get involved and then just prepare your kids. Prepare them.
Hey, Tina, I've got a question for you. Maybe say the quiet thing out loud here. I thoroughly have enjoyed your presentation. As myself as a former student athlete, 2 sports, high school and college, and coaching, and then also being a parent of student athletes. I want to know from your experience, this whole idea of athletics and culture and messaging and the role of parents and coaches. What is your experience across the board in terms of school districts' comfort level with dealing with some of these situations where perhaps parents are pushing kids for college. And I love that when you put the statistic up about the number of kids who actually really do get to play Division 1, 2, or 3 sports. But the pressure from parents and maybe perhaps the unintended overlooking by coaches and school district administrators around these issues for the bad publicity, you know, just all of the stuff sometimes that gets in the way. Do you feel as districts are open to dealing with these issues or closed off, or also protecting student athletes when they're policy violators or when any of these other things are happening? What do you see in responsiveness of a district?
Yeah, I mean, I will say it's getting better. You know, I think with all behavioral health services in schools, like we've seen a bigger trend in openness overall. I've definitely had districts that are very close to it and don't want the messaging in there, and they are districts that have been problematic, a lot of violators. And so, I mean, I got to tell you, that's where I get the calls, and maybe my perception is skewed because of what I do. And I'm that person that's getting called into those situations, but it is the saddest thing to me when I see college athletes losing scholarships or we do so much violations. That's what I'm called in at the college level. They're now taking a turn and saying, I think maybe we should do some prevention with our athletes. I'm like, I think that's a good idea. But it's really has been on the other end of that postvention. They're in trouble, and I need you to come assess this athlete. And all of their use started in high school.
In high school,
they were protected. And it's so sad to it makes me sick in my stomach, as so many stories are going through my head right now. Sitting in rooms with a parent whose kid has faced such a significant consequence, or far worse than that, something they will never recover from, injuries, experiences lost. I've been with parents who have lost their kids because of hazing and alcohol use and things like that. And every single one of those situations, it didn't start in college. It started in high school, and we've given them passes, and we haven't held them accountable. And now they're in another situation where they're not as protected.
Right.
They're not. And now they've got to face far more significant consequences. And I wish for every single one of those athletes, I could turn back the clock and make a change, you know? And I'll never forget this one situation, a kid that I worked with in high school, phenomenal athlete, but very, very much into alcohol and cannabis. And he would get caught, bad situations, being in bad places he shouldn't have been, criminal activity, was never, even from the criminal justice system. Cops picking him up, finding him intoxicated, driving him home to the family, saying, don't let me see it again. Don't let me see it again. But we see it again and again with this kid. And me trying to, and then he went off to college and went off the rails. And he hurt somebody so badly that he was incarcerated for 30 years. And I thought it was all because we wanted to get him to that moment. And now he's incarcerated. And I think what if we would have held him accountable at that time, in those young years, when we could have surrounded him with so many supports, got him treatment, and yet maybe he wouldn't have gone to that D1 college. Maybe he would have had to go to a junior college first, and maybe we could have worked his way up to something, but it would have been a far better situation right now. That situation, watching that play out, was the catalyst for me to do this work. I was
absolutely
it has to stop. And so that's why I drive that message home as much as I can to high school parents, to say, this is not a rite of passage. This is harming your kid. And we cannot protect them. We need to get kids and get them to be the healthiest versions for themselves, because it is much tougher at that next level, and they're not going to get this that they're going to get now. They're not going to get it. They're losing scholarships. They're kicked out of school. Parents are going, it happens almost daily. I'm getting those calls.
It does.
And so I just, I think we've got to address it strongly now.
Agreed. Great.
Yeah, we're changing a whole culture, right? I mean, it's not just culture, but it's the school culture. Like, let's hold kids accountable.
Because on one hand, we talk about this now, Chrissy, we had this conversation in the very beginning. Sports are a protective factor. Athletics are a protective factor. They really are. And I believe they were for myself.
Yeah.
For a lot of the students that I coached, they were. However, it does become a slippery slope here. And they also can, as you shared with us tonight, move from that protective factor to being something that is risky. And that's that fine line. That it is a balance, and it's sort of very muddy how that happens. And again, it doesn't necessarily happen intentionally, but it's some of the unintentional things. The very best things about sports and athletics also can be a risk factor at the exact same time with certain students, certain personalities, certain family dynamics, all of that. And then, of course, adding the stress and the mental health piece really does complicate it. And so that's why I really think that this work that you're doing is so incredibly important. And I wish that I could have this be a requirement. Everyone who coaches, every athletic trainer, every parent of a student athlete would get this information, and that schools would seriously look at the good, bad, and the ugly of athletics.
Yeah, because I my other part of that too is that I've never seen somebody who wished that kid harm. Like they weren't protecting them,
right?
Thinking that they're going to harm this kid. They were protecting them, thinking they were doing the best thing for this kid.
Best thing for them, right?
That they'll grow out of it, or we're going to get them there, and it's going to be this great experience. They're going to be motivated by the experience, and it just doesn't happen like that. Not for most, And so there's always those exceptions. I always have somebody say, "Oh no, I know somebody." Yeah, I know some folks too, but it's not the norm. It's not the norm. And so they're well-meaning parents, well-meaning.
Oh, absolutely.
Meaning. We don't address those issues. It could be a lifetime of issues for each child. Nobody wants to take those risks with their kids. So, yeah. No, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
I like doing coaches and parents together, so they're hearing them collectively, so they can say, like, we're working together as parents and coaches to send very clear messages. I like
absolutely. And I really like that the point about having consistent messages and working on this together. I think that's incredibly important. And I don't know, Sarah, Chrissy, did you have any other questions or comments before we kind of wrap up this evening? So Tina, thank you. I really hope that we will continue to have open conversations about this. And I hope that this is just sort of launching us as we continue this work in our Downingtown community. And I want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. The information that this is going to be recorded. We will have this program posted through the Downingtown Area School District website and also on the CTC website, and we're hoping that you will share this. We'll put this out in our social media posts. And also thank you, Tina, for the resources that Caring Treatment Center has for parents and for coaches. It's exceptional information that's out there. No shortage of great information that you shared with us this evening. And to those of you who are joining us this evening, please check our website, the school district website, for upcoming programs and resources for parents and for youth. And hopefully we'll see all of you joining us at our next parent speaker program in the winter, when we'll be talking about mental health and technology, yet one more hot topic that we're always concerned about. So thank you for joining us this evening. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. Tina, thanks again. It was an outstanding presentation and I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Thank you everyone for joining us. Take care.